Hi everybody, this is Jack R. for Contra 1 and wanted to let you know that this is the 5400th video that I've made, and just a note on how we're doing during this situation, and we're doing okay. Neither of us have any symptoms and we're doing fine. And making this video on the 14th of July, so it's going in the basket here for release on the, let's see, the 29th. So at any rate, no, the 30th. It's the 30th is going to be released. So we're doing okay. Mark's still working part-time though, and I'm staying at home doing the occasional shopping that has to be done. I went to a car show the other day on Sunday, and you just saw a couple videos that I did at the local show, and it's outside in a field, so it's pretty safe, I think. But the rest of the shows pretty much have been canceled. I hold out hope that in August there is an auction Mecum has in Kissimmee, and maybe it will be okay to go there at that point. I don't know. I don't trust enclosed spaces, and so there's no restaurants for me except to go in and get something and take out. I don't want to sit down in a restaurant, even though they are, I'm sure, pretty good at spacing of their customers. But at any rate, the situation here about restaurants and Florida has had some tough times, and I don't know how it's going to materialize over time. Schools are supposed to be starting in August, and I don't know how that's going to turn out. So we just do it day by day and carry on, as they say. Keep a stiff upper lip. So today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our 1961 Ford Falcon, and I remember it vividly. To bring you up to date, my dad's first venture into automobilia was a 1952 Henry J, and it was brand new, and the sticker price on it was $1,400, but he got it for $1,200. And the story about that was that they didn't sell all they had produced in 1951, so they sent the remaining 51 Henry J's back to Willow Run, where they were made, and had them reserialized as 52s. So this became the 52 Henry J, Vagabond, which was really a 51 that had been reserialized. And it was a very, 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 I underscore, very basic car. It had the 4-cylinder engine. 6 was available, but my dad is very economical, shall we say, and ordered had the 4-cylinder model. Everything was optional. It did have a heater, but it didn't have vents. They had to be put on extra. No radio. Manual choke, and so on and so forth. So I won't bother. I think I've mentioned that before and told you about the Henry J before. It had rust problems very, very quickly, and by 56, we changed that out and got a 54 Studebaker Champion, the base model there. And then went from that to a used 58 Rambler cross country station wagon, which was also used, and I think that was like 1960 or 60, yeah. So that wasn't too satisfactory. Although Ramblers had good reputations, that one was used and abused, I think, pretty hard before we got it. So we moved on to another brand new car, a 1961 Ford Falcon, 4-door, and it was a base, and let me underline base model. It had the small 6-cylinder, and they made 2 6-cylinder engines. We had the small one, and I'm trying to think. I think it was maybe 144 cubic inches, and then the bigger one was like 160 cubic inches. At any rate, manual choke. Also, it did have a radio. Ah, yes, and the seats were plastic, and but they were okay. We immediately, as was the custom at the time, had Rayco seat covers installed over the seats, because seats were kind of notorious for not being able to accept much wear and tear. So our salesman at the Ford dealer, local Ford dealer, was a very exuberant guy. He was on the heavy side, shall I say, and he eager to show us how spacious the trunk was, and opened the trunk lid, and much to our amazement, got in the trunk. And there wasn't much room to spare, I'm sure, but he did demonstrate how big the trunk was. But what a guy. So anyhow, we accepted delivery of that vehicle, and all in all, it wasn't a bad car. But at about 30,000 miles, it developed a squeaking noise under the hood, a high-pitched squeak, more like a squeal. And the guarantee was still in effect. Took it back to the dealer, and nobody could hear it except one mechanic. And I think this is a pretty good demonstration of hearing loss back in the 60s. These guys worked without ear protection, and I'm sure the majority of people in that place had hearing damage because of it. At any rate, the one mechanic did hear it. So it turned out that the valve train, the overhead valves, weren't getting sufficient oil. So they saw to it that that was corrected. But fortunately, he was able to understand what the problem was, and they were able to fix it at no charge. So my dad didn't like to drive all that much. He also didn't like shifting gears. And the Rambler, I think, spoiled him because it had automatic transmission, and this one did not. So he kind of didn't downshift as much as he probably should have. And this had the 3-speed manual on the tree. And into our ownership of this car, there's a rib in the ceiling, and there's of course the liner, the overhead liner that covers that, but the rib became detached and was on one end, just one end, and was almost making it through the headliner. And took it to the body shop, and they were able to tack weld it back in place. But if the idea of this was to add support to the roof, one wonders how much support that was capable of giving, at least in its unrepaired state. The car was very base, very, very base. Not as bad as a Henry J, but it was approaching that. It did have reverse lights on it, and however, they failed to work. And I looked under the hood, and I looked at how it was actuated. And it turns out that it was as basic as you could get. There was a switch that was actuated by the rods that came down from down from the steering column that controlled what gear you were in. And the rod would supposedly push this switch so that the rear lights would be actuated when you put it in reverse. So it was part metal, and then the sides of it, a couple of the sides of it were like almost a cardboard type thing with this like a paper product, and very flimsy, extremely flimsy. So I thought right there and then there was no use in replacing that, because it was probably going to go out of adjustment or not function again. So I simply put a switch in the circuit that came out there on the tow board by the driver, so that you put it in reverse, you could just flip the switch and the lights would go on. The trick was not to forget you had flipped the switch. So, and I didn't have a little red warning light to indicate that it was on. So at any rate, other tales about the Ford? Not much. My mother learned to drive in that car, and I remember her going, we were at the Jersey Shore, and it was Sea Isle City, as a matter of fact, and there was a road that ran parallel to the coast, and the speed limit was 25. And I remember her commenting that 25 was fast enough for me, she said, as she was learning to drive. At any rate, she became a pretty good driver, as it turned out, and was driving into her 90s, as a matter of fact. So that pretty much is, it was a pretty light car. So I'll tell you this, that my dad would put ashes in the back of the car, so that in that trunk, which the salesman demonstrated, he would put weights back there so that the car wasn't too likely to skid out of control in the icy conditions up in Pennsylvania. So I think that's about it for the Falcon. And eventually wound up getting a 63 Dodge Dart, and eventually my parents wound up with that 63 Dart and traded the Falcon in. So at any rate, that's the story of the Falcon, and that is my 5400th video. And I have used this new camera, and I think now what I'm showing you here is with the camera in the computer, so that's not the same. But I'm pleased with the new camera. It's quite inexpensive, and it's about a quarter of the price of the GoPro. Has stabilization, etc., etc. So, at any rate, thanks for your continued viewership, and I sure thank you for your comments. And they're always a wealth of information, so much more than I oftentimes have. And but occasionally I find some really good stuff, and I do put references to it so that you can explore it to your own interest. So thanks again, and Mark thanks you, and goodbye.